3 million years ago, as early humans began to appear on Earth, our protagonist was among them. At first, he seemed just like any other primitive being, but there was something different about him, something that set him apart. Despite his unusual obsession with hunting, the MC believed he was no different from everyone else. However, he soon realized something was wrong. While those around him aged, weakened, and eventually died, he didn't. No matter what happened, he simply wouldn't die. Time passed, eons came and went, yet he remained the same. Well, not exactly the same. While the years left no mark on him, his body kept changing, growing larger, stronger, more powerful. Through endless time, the only things that kept him going were hunting, fighting, and battling anything or anyone that seemed worth his time. He was cursed with eternal life and unbearable loneliness, and those were the only things that gave him any joy. For nearly 3 million years he lived this way, his body evolving day by day, becoming stronger and stronger. Eventually, he reached a point where his strength was unmatched, so much so that others began to call him the God of Earth. His power grew to the extent that he defeated every other god in existence, claiming the title of the strongest in the divine realm. But after that, things started to change. With no one left to challenge him, his once thrilling days of combat and excitement turned into an endless stretch of boredom. To show just how fed up he was with his dull routine, Mu raised his foot and slammed it down on the ground beneath him. The entire dwelling of the gods, which resembled a small planet, shook violently from the impact. But that wasn't even the worst part. The whole divine realm started trembling, leaving every god, angel, and even the evils within it absolutely terrified. Of course, this wasn't the first time God Mu had pulled such a stunt, and there were some gods who couldn't take being shaken up every day. One of them was Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Completely bored, Mu acted as though he didn't care about the chaos he was causing. His mind was consumed with the same thought that had plagued him for centuries. He had defeated every single worthy opponent without breaking a sweat, and now, over 1,000 years had passed since he faced anyone who could challenge him. Letting out a deep sigh, Mu muttered, "Being too strong is a problem too." The words clicked in his mind. After 1,000 years of mindless frustration, he suddenly felt like a genius. If his strength was the problem, the solution was simple. He needed to find a way to weaken himself. If he had a weak body like the Earthlings, he'd have hundreds of opponents to fight. Suddenly, Mu stood up and shouted, "Dragonling!" Out of nowhere, a massive dragon appeared in the sky above him, then descended with a thunderous landing. The dragon's height was at least 5 times bigger than Mu's throne, and from its stance, it didn't seem thrilled to be summoned. But those glowing eyes belonged to Liam, Mu's assistant. Liam's demeanor shifted, and he let out a deep growl, asking why he had been called. To his surprise, Mu simply started walking away and casually told Liam to take care of things while he was gone. However, things didn't go as Mu expected. Out of nowhere, the dragon cast a spell called Binding of the Absolute, shackling Mu in an attempt to stop him. But the moment Mu turned his head and gave him a side glance filled with anger, Liam's entire demeanor shifted again. His fierce and wild attitude melted away, and he suddenly looked scared and ashamed. Stammering, the dragon tried to explain himself, saying he didn't mean to offend Mu, but that Mu should have at least given an explanation, especially since a gods meeting was coming up soon. Mu, however, didn't care about the gods meeting. Without saying another word, he started walking again, dragging Liam along with the chains like they were nothing. Seeing his plan fail, Liam quickly switched tactics and started playing the victim. He whined that if Mu didn't show up for the meeting, he'd be the one stuck dealing with the other gods' endless complaints. In response, Mu effortlessly broke the binding spell as if it was nothing. He turned to Liam and yelled, saying he wouldn't go anywhere unless the dragon agreed to fight him right now. That was all it took to completely change Liam's attitude. Realizing that taking blame from the other gods was far better than being torn apart by Mu, Liam immediately wished him a safe and short trip. Mu smirked and walked toward a small version of Earth floating nearby. Stretching out his hand, he touched the surface, wondering whose body he should inhabit. To make his decision easier, he started listening to messages Earthlings were sending to the gods. Most were trivial, but one message caught his attention. It questioned his very existence. At first, the message annoyed Mu, but soon he realized this person was the perfect choice for his journey on Earth. For the first time in 1,000 years, Mu felt genuinely excited. He had finally found a solution to his endless boredom. While Mu couldn't have been happier, Liam looked far less enthusiastic about the whole thing. For a brief moment, Mu considered giving an explanation before leaving, but true to his Sigma personality, he decided against it. To Liam's surprise, Mu simply said goodbye, entrusted the place to him, and told him to take care of anyone who might show up in his absence. Liam felt a mix of worry and frustration. Mu was only sending his soul to Earth, leaving his body behind. Concerned, the dragon tried to remind him of the risks. If something happened to Mu's body, his separated soul would die on Earth. But Mu, confident no one in the divine realm would dare harm him, brushed off the concerns and did what he wanted without further explanation. The scene abruptly shifted. It wasn't Mu anymore, but someone entirely different, someone who had just defeated a demon lord in a video game. The feeling of victory was overwhelming, but it wasn't real life. It was just the final scene of a game a player had finished moments ago. That player was a 17-year-old named Lee Ho. Lee was painfully jealous of the heroes in every video game he played. Those lucky protagonists who always gathered hordes of cute girls on their ridiculous adventures. As he stared at the game credits, he sighed, wishing his life were anything like theirs. Suddenly, Lee's phone slipped from his hand, falling from a great height. The phone hit the ground with a loud crash, shattering into pieces. It became clear why Lee was standing on the edge of a 3-story building. He was ready to end his life. Trembling and covered in injuries, Lee whispered a bitter farewell to this cruel world before jumping. As he fell, he screamed, "If there's a god out there, prove it! Send me to another world!" But before he could finish, he hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood splattered everywhere, and his head smashed into the pavement. By all accounts, he should have been dead. But then something strange happened. Lee's hands twitched, his chest heaved, and he started breathing heavily as though someone had pulled him from drowning. Unknown to Lee, God Mu's soul had possessed his body in the blink of an eye. Now, Mu was forced to endure the unbearable pain of Lee's broken body, completely unaware of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Lee's soul had been transported to the divine realm, where he stood, utterly shocked, face to face with a towering dragon. The dragon, too, was stunned. He hadn't expected to see a human in the divine realm, just as Lee hadn't expected the first thing he'd see after dying to be an angry dragon glaring at him. Let's rewind and see what happened 10 seconds before this incident unfolded. Mu was standing there, touching the surface of the mini-Earth with his signature smirk. He wasn't worried about leaving his defenseless body behind. He had full confidence it would be safe. The dragon had tried to warn him, but Mu brushed off the warnings and sent his soul to Earth, swapping places with Lee's soul. The moment Mu's soul entered Lee's body, he found himself in a life-or-death situation. With no time to adjust, he was plummeting toward the ground. Before he could even process the danger, Lee's body hit the ground with incredible force. Bones shattered, and Mu experienced pain beyond anything he had ever felt in his immortal life. But it wasn't the pain that confused him. It was the sheer chaos of the situation. Why did this happen? How had he ended up in such a mess? Seconds later, Mu's heart started beating again. By forcing his blood to flow and repairing his heart, he managed to stop the bleeding. Slowly, he began to rise to his feet, though his body screamed in pain. Rather than anger, Mu found himself oddly happy. It had been so long since he'd felt anything like this. The next step was to sift through Lee's memories, which didn't take long. He learned that Lee had lived alone, was poor, and was constantly bullied. This was exactly the chaotic, messy starting point Mu had hoped for. It had potential for challenges. Full of excitement, Mu threw a random punch into the air, but the sharp pain that shot through his arm reminded him that this wasn't his indestructible body. Despite the pain, Mu smirked. He had found exactly what he was looking for. The next day, police arrived at the scene where Leo's body had crashed to the ground, discovering bloodstains and shattered glass scattered across the pavement. They swiftly cordoned off the area, barring anyone from entering as they began their investigation. Meanwhile, Mu returned to the site, not out of concern for the police, but because the 3-story building nearby was none other than Lee's school. Determined to maintain Lee's daily routine, he strolled into the school, scanning the halls until he located Lee's classroom. His excitement got the better of him as he yanked the sliding door open with excessive force. The door rebounded, smacking him square in the face and leaving the mighty god momentarily dazed. His triumphant entrance ruined, Mu muttered under his breath before stepping inside, drawing the attention of one of Lee's classmates. The boy scowled at the noise, shooting Mu an irritated glare. "Idiot Lee Ho," he snapped. "Keep it down." Hearing the insult, Mu forgot the pain in his face and strode toward the boy, stopping uncomfortably close. The bully, recognizable from Lee's memories as the one who tormented him, was taken aback, not by Lee's frail appearance but by the unsettling grin twisting Mu's lips. "What's wrong with you?" the bully sneered. "Did you forget your glasses, or are you just too stupid to act normal today?" Before Mu could respond, the boy swung his fist, landing a hard punch to his face. Blood dripped from Mu's nose and mouth, pooling on the floor. The bully smirked, clearly pleased with himself. "Did you sell your glasses for cash, or are you just that much of a loser?" he taunted. Despite the blood, Mu didn't flinch. To him, a true fight only began when both parties willingly showed their intent to battle. And Mu confirmed that intent by enduring the first strike. The moment the punch connected, exhilaration surged through him. Without hesitation, he retaliated, driving his own fist into the bully's face. But as he pulled back, a sharp pain tore through his arm. His human body wasn't built for this. The commotion drew the teacher's angry shouts, but the entire class was already watching, captivated by the spectacle of the school's weakest student standing up to a bully. Humiliated, the bully charged again, ignoring the teacher's commands. Mu blocked most of the blows, though his fragile body struggled to keep up. For a fleeting moment, he considered using his godly powers, only to find them useless. Distracted, he took another punch to the face, thankfully weaker than the last. Realizing brute force wouldn't work, Mu lowered his head and let the next strike land on his skull, the one part of this body he could rely on. Just as he predicted, the bully's fingers shattered on impact, his scream piercing the air. Seizing the advantage, Mu lunged forward, headbutting the bully in the stomach, then again in the jaw. The boy collapsed, unconscious, as the class watched in stunned silence. But Mu wasn't finished. In a move that horrified everyone, he leaned down, bit off a piece of the bully's ear and spat it onto the floor. Blood splattered as students recoiled in shock. To Mu, this wasn't savagery. It was a mark of respect, a twisted acknowledgement of a worthy opponent. The news spread like wildfire. The weakest student had not only beaten a bully but marked him. Emergency services arrived, hauling the boy away as Mu watched, amused. He waved goodbye, already hoping for a rematch. Then a furious teacher grabbed him, dragging him to the office. "Have you lost your mind?" the teacher roared, raising a binder as if to strike. Mu didn't flinch. Instead, he grinned, his face flushing with excitement. Hand midair, unwilling to risk the same fate as the student in the hospital, he chose to skip the punishment entirely. Instead, he turned to Mu, whom he believed was Li Ho, and ordered him to bring his parents to school the next day. Mu braced himself, expecting a strike from the teacher, but when the anticipated blow never came, the confirmation of their battle, he abandoned the thought of fighting back. Just then, the teacher dismissed him, allowing him to leave school earlier than the others. Without protest, Mu obeyed and exited the building. As he walked toward Li's house, Mu's mind wandered. Unlike other gods who possessed complete knowledge of the worlds they governed, Mu was uncertain about the teacher's intentions. Was "leave earlier" a suggestion to return to his base, or something else entirely? Since no other explanation made sense, he assumed it was just that. Deciding to use this unexpected free time, he focused on healing his injuries and training his fragile new body. If he wanted to face stronger opponents in the future, he needed to grow stronger. His hand trembled visibly from the pain of his earlier wounds. At that moment, he longed to use his godly powers, like mana, to accelerate his recovery. Mana, as Mu understood it, was a force beyond human capability. In some realms, it was called chi, or chakra, but most gods referred to it as mana, a life force permeating nature, granting humans extraordinary abilities. It allowed them to become hunters, wizards, or even powerful players in different worlds. Yet, in this world, Mu couldn't rely on it, no matter how much he desired to. For now, he had to endure the pain and adapt to his new life and body. He attempted to channel mana once more, but it dissipated within seconds, reminding him of his earlier failed attempt during battle. Frustrated, he resolved to focus solely on physical training. Before long, Mu arrived at Li's home and collapsed onto the bed. Knowing his recovery would take time, with little else to do, he decided to return to the god's realm to check on events there. In an instant, his soul shifted back to his original body, just as it had when he first came to Earth. As Mu regained consciousness, his eyes widened in shock. Before him, Li Ho was choking a dragonling, refusing to release the helpless creature. The once weak boy, bullied relentlessly on Earth, now turned to Mu with newfound confidence, demanding he hand over the dragon. Unaware of Mu's true identity as a god, Li believed he could seize control of the dragonling to dominate his new life. Displeased by Li's arrogance, Mu summoned a godly hand and gripped him tightly, making it clear he wouldn't tolerate such insolence. Ignoring Li's protests, Mu dragged him away, his expression hinting at ulterior motives. Minutes later, they arrived at the domain of Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu strode in confidently, his presence undeniable. Lucifer, unlike Mu, was diligently overseeing his planet, Elur. Without hesitation or permission, Mu marched into Lucifer's castle as if he were dealing with an ordinary mortal. Naturally, Lucifer was displeased by Mu's rudeness and immediately rejected whatever requests they had, refusing to even hear them out. Unfazed, Mu demanded Lucifer open the gate, declaring his intention to send Lee to the planet Elmer. Lucifer retorted that Elmer wasn't Mu's domain, so he had no authority to make such a decision. Mu, however, leaned in and reminded Lucifer of their power disparity, asserting he could do as he pleased. To emphasize his point, he challenged Lucifer to test his strength if he doubted it. Knowing he was outmatched, Lucifer trembled in frustration. Tired of Lucifer's hesitation, Mu stepped forward and touched Elmer's surface himself. Caught off guard, Lucifer warned that interfering with another god's domain was forbidden. Any unauthorized contact would trigger an unbreakable barrier. True to his word, the barrier appeared, but to Lucifer's disbelief, Mu shattered it effortlessly. Stunned, Lucifer stared as Mu calmly remarked that the universe's rules could be changed by those with the will to do so. Mu then released Lee, urging him to leap into the portal he had created on Elmer. Lee hesitated, fear evident, but Mu reminded him this was the opportunity he had always begged for. When Lee again demanded the Dragonling to dominate his new life, Mu refused and forcefully sent him to Elmer. Afterward, Mu mused about how modern youths expected everything handed to them without effort. With the matter settled, he casually instructed Lucifer to take care of the boy before departing. Humiliated and seething, Lucifer could only fantasize about tearing Mu apart. Lucifer's past mirrored Mu's in some ways. Once the first demon lord in history, he had claimed the title of the strongest on Elmer's planet. In his arrogance, he challenged the god ruling his world, defeating him with a blinding sword of light. Afterward, Lucifer overthrew every other god, claiming the ultimate throne as the god of gods, invincible and supreme. But his reign ended when Mu arrived and crushed him, shattering his mighty image before all. Consumed by rage, Lucifer vowed revenge, cursing Mu as a human-born bastard. Back in the present, Mu rode his dragonling toward his domain. Unaware a demon, likely sent by Lucifer, was watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Back just like Lucifer, who's counting down the minutes for his chance to get revenge for his humiliation. The bully from Lee's school who had just regained consciousness couldn't wait to see Lee dead. Still lying in his hospital bed, the boy grabbed his phone and decided to call someone tougher to teach Lee a lesson fueled by burning anger. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name of that person he was looking for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, someone was going hard on a punching bag. That guy's name was Kang Chael, the youth division middleweight boxing champion. His intense training session was suddenly interrupted by an obnoxiously loud ringtone. Annoyed, Kang stopped mid-punch, sweat dripping down his body, and turned to see whose phone was making that ridiculous noise. That's when another guy, a blonde, walked in and casually said it was his phone. He strolled over, picked it up, and answered. Sounding irritated, that guy was Hung Chil, a boxer with 2 years of experience under his belt. As expected, the caller was none other than the beaten-up bully with desperation in his voice, and without any introduction, he told Hung he'd buy him a new phone if he wanted, but asked him to do one small favor first. At first, Hung was a bit surprised to hear the request, but since it sounded like an easy and good deal, he agreed and asked what he needed to do. The next day during class, when everything seemed normal again, the bully walked in as if nothing had happened the day before. As he made his way to his seat, the entire classroom suddenly went silent for a moment, with everyone's eyes fixed on him. Then the murmurs and whispers started. The students were talking about how someone who used to bully others ended up in such a pathetic state. At first, he tried to ignore it, but when the whispers turned into jokes about him being neutered, he couldn't take it anymore to show he wasn't someone to mess with. He slammed his backpack on the floor and yelled at them, saying he could still take them all down. Even when he got neutered, he challenged anyone who doubted his strength to fight him. That's when the class president, a girl with glasses, stood up and shouted back, telling him to either shut up or leave the classroom. Seeing that girl dared to talk to him like that for the first time only made him angrier, frustrated that even the class president dared to stand up to him. He completely lost it. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a random chair and tried to throw it at her to remind everyone they should fear him like they used to before he could do anything. The door suddenly swung open, and a massive Hulk-like teacher walked into the classroom demanding to know what all the fuss was about. To everyone's surprise, the bully instantly dropped into his seat and acted as if nothing had happened. The teacher looked around and noticed the class president standing clearly angry. He asked her what was going on and why she was out of her seat. However, the girl didn't spill the truth. Instead, she quickly returned to her seat and assured him it wasn't anything worth mentioning. The teacher didn't press further, but for some reason he told the girl to meet him after class. Something that the girl got curious to know why. When the school day ended, she met him as instructed, and it turned out he wanted a favor since she was the class president and someone he could trust. He asked her to check on Lei Ho, who had been absent that day and wasn't answering his phone. In exchange, the teacher promised to write her a recommendation letter for her senior year. It was framed as a request, but the girl knew she couldn't exactly say no. Reluctantly, she agreed. Before long, she found herself standing in front of Lee's house, looking completely uninterested in whatever situation he might be in. Wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible, she didn't waste any time. She walked up to the door and knocked, calling out to see if anyone was home when no one responded. She hesitated for a moment before deciding to check if the door was locked. Turning the doorknob, she realized it wasn't. To her surprise, the door wasn't locked, so she slowly stepped inside the house. The moment she walked in, she froze in shock. Right there in front of her was Lee's lifeless-looking body surrounded by a filthy room where bugs seemed to be playing hide and seek. Lee's appearance was horrifying. His eyes had rolled back completely white, and his mouth was wide open. The sight made the girl scream in terror, thinking Lee was dead. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her phone and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Lee to the nearest hospital. It didn't take long for the doctors to figure out what had happened. Lee had probably fainted from pure starvation, abandoned by Gautama, who had left his body earlier. He was hospitalized and hooked up to a nutrient IV to stabilize him. Just then, something strange happened. As Lee's body lay still, it suddenly twitched in an instant. Mu returned to Lee's body the moment Mu opened his eyes. He was completely disoriented. The place didn't look familiar at all. Confused, he tried to figure out where he was and how he'd ended up there before he could make sense of anything. He felt something odd looking down. He realized something was attached to his hand. It was the fourth line delivering the nutrient serum as a god who had lived only for battle. And fighting Mu had no knowledge of human tools or technology in this era, and this strange serum was no exception. He stared at it with a mix of curiosity and unease, trying to process what was happening. Even though he didn't understand what the serum was, Gotham immediately figured out that it was sending something into his body, and only through his vessels with his godly knowledge of what was happening inside him. It didn't take long for him to realize it was nutrients. He could sense his body absorbing them, rapidly speeding up his recovery to Mu. It felt like some kind of healing magic, though he knew very well it wasn't magic. As Lee started moving his head around, regaining consciousness, the girl sitting nearby finally noticed he was awake. However, the creepy smile on his face made her think he was a little crazy. Still, she asked if Lee knew what had happened to him that caused him to faint. Not waiting for an answer, she grabbed her bag, stood up, and announced she was heading back to school to report everything to the teacher as he had asked her to. Mu quickly sat up and tried to stop her. He didn't know who this girl was exactly, but he assumed she was the one who had helped him recover so quickly. However, even after realizing that he didn't thank her, instead, in typical Mu fashion, he asked for something else. Entirely, the girl was in a hurry to leave, but Mu was eager to gather more information about Earth and how people lived here, pulling the serum out of his hand. He gave his usual creepy smile and asked if she knew a place where he could train to get stronger. The girl turned her head slightly and gave him a side glance, honestly in her eyes. This boy looked like anything but an athlete. Add to that the poor, dirty condition of his house. It didn't exactly show if he really cares about sports still. After a moment of thought, she suggested a specific place for him. It wasn't anything fancy, just an outdoor gym at a nearby park, with some simple workout equipment. Not wasting any time, Mu made his way to the park and began his training. He quickly started doing pull-ups on the bars, pushing his body as hard as he could. When he finally grew tired, he dropped to the ground to take a break, sweat dripping off his body as he looked around. Mu couldn't help but feel impressed. To him, these simple pieces of exercise equipment looked like professional training tools. It had been almost 4,000 years since he'd last set foot on Earth, and after that, he hadn't bothered to check on human progress as the Earth God. Seeing even these basic workout machines left him in awe. Back in his time, humans trained with something entirely different, primitive methods that were far harder and less efficient. This modern equipment, though simple by human standards, was revolutionary. In Mo's eyes, Mu started randomly testing each piece of equipment, even though he had no idea how any of them actually worked. Suddenly, in the middle of his training, something small like a pebble hit him on the back and fell to the ground. To his surprise, it was the beaten-up bully from earlier, and this time he had brought someone along, a boxer named Hung, to fight him. Even with the boxer beside him, the bully acted like a barking dog, yelling insults at Lee from a safe distance, but not daring to step closer. Mu couldn't care less about his barking. Calmly, he sat down, picked up the rock, and asked who had thrown it. The beaten-up guy, feeling a little braver now that Hyung was there to back him up, shouted that he was the one who did it. He started ranting about how Lee would pay for hurting him, bragging about how Hung, his cousin, and a professional boxer, was going to beat him to death. But before he could finish explaining, Mu saw an opening and caught him off guard with a sudden punch. The guy hit the ground screaming in pain as his already broken nose got smashed again. This was the result of starting a fight with God Mu by throwing a stone. And of course, Mu couldn't have been happier about it. That was on Earth. But in the realm of the gods, things were a bit more complicated. The time for the usual meeting of the gods had arrived, but Mao was nowhere to be seen. As his only assistant, the Dragonling had to attend the meeting in his place with his lord absent. The nervous little dragon stuttered as he awkwardly began to deliver Mu's message before the Dragonling could even get through the first few words of the letter. Lucifer suddenly interrupted, glaring at the drag. He demanded to know why a mere assistant dared to step into a meeting meant for gods, let alone speak first as if he were someone important. Lucifer's intimidating demeanor scared the poor Dragonling out of his wits. Panicked, the dragon quickly clarified that he was only there to deliver a message from God Mu and had no intention of disrespecting or offending anyone with his presence, determined to fulfill his duty and get out of there before things escalated. The Dragonling began to read the letter with a trembling voice, but the message turned out to be nothing out of the ordinary. As usual, Mu was simply asking the gods to let him know if they came across any worthy opponents for him to fight. That was it. Lucifer couldn't hold back his anger after hearing that, and slammed the table with a resounding bang. As the second most powerful god in the divine realm, he couldn't stand how Mu not only did whatever he pleased, but now even ignored the meeting. And the gods entirely. Lucifer wasn't wrong, and most of the gods silently agreed with him. However, even in Mo's absence, none of them dared to openly criticize him. Lucifer pressed on, declaring that the gods' meeting was meant to ensure the stability and safety of their worlds as the third strongest god, and of course as someone already in Mu's playthings. List the Archer. God finally spoke up. He argued that if, same as always, any abnormalities occurred even on Earth, they were the ones who always should take care of them instead of Mu, and that was most unacceptable thing for strongest god among them. Seizing the moment, Lucifer slammed the table again. His voice booming with frustration, he shouted that Mu's habit of treating everything like a game was pushing all the worlds to the brink of collapse. In his opinion, the few times Mu actually decided to solve something usually ended up making things worse to make his argument more convincing. Lucifer turned to the god of Cyclops, the 9th-ranked deity in the divine realm, and asked if he remembered what Mu had done 1,000 years ago when the Cyclops planet was on the brink of destruction. Back then, a massive, ugly creature as large as the Cyclops planet itself attacked a rare being known as a void creature capable of devouring an entire planet in seconds. Just as the void creature began tearing the Cyclops planet apart, something suddenly shot straight through the middle of it, splitting it into two unequal pieces. That something, of course, was God Mu, with his usual cheerful and flushed face. Delighted at the chance for a fight, Mu had effortlessly killed the enormous creature. In an instant, Lucifer used this event to drive his point home, trying to make everyone, especially the Cyclops, God see that Mu was to blame for the aftermath of the destruction. He explained that if Mu had cooperated with the other gods instead of acting alone, there wouldn't have been any casualties, having made his case. And likely swaying the other gods to his side, Lucifer declared that they could no longer stand by and let someone unfit to be a god continue risking the safety of their worlds. On the other side, the Dragonling was left speechless. He couldn't do or say anything to defend his lord. The only thing he could do was silently pray, beg his lord to return before things spiraled even further out of control. The scene shifts back to Earth, where the beaten guy started making noise again. He barked at Mu, warning him once more that his boxer cousin is going to make him pay for what he did to him. Hai Young, the so-called boxer cousin, was intrigued. He couldn't help but be a little impressed by how fast Mu had moved and punched earlier. Curious, he asked if Mu practiced any sports like martial arts, but Mu casually replied that he didn't play any sports because all he wanted was to fight, not play. Mu's response, however, made Hung think of him as nothing more than an overconfident, dumb middle schooler, spitting out his chewing gum with a smirk. Hung took a fighting stance and said he was ready to fight just as Mu had apparently wanted. Hung decided to start first, moving quickly to test this guy and see if he was all talk, or actually had some skill. His opening strike was fast and sharp, landing hard on Mu's face before Mu could dodge or block. But despite the satisfaction of landing the first blow, something about Mu stunned Young. There was something strange, something downright unusual about this opponent, and it sent a chill running up his spine. As an experienced boxer who carefully observed his opponent's movements, Hyung found it strange that Mu didn't move an inch. even when he had clearly been watching the punch coming from the start, just like the beaten guy who had hired him. Young had no idea that his opponent wasn't human, but a god, and not just any god. A god who was absolutely obsessed with fighting. What Hung also didn't know was that Mu never dodged a preemptive strike for him. Taking the first hit was like a signal confirming that the battle had officially begun. With his usual unsettling, overly excited grin, Mu suddenly shouted, "Is hand-to-hand combat your favorite thing?" His creepy smile and strange behavior made Hyung wonder if this guy was just some crazy teenager. Then out of nowhere, Mu mimicked Hyung's fighting stance and launched himself forward. Hyung didn't take it seriously at all, thinking it was just a dumb copycat move. When Mu threw a punch, Hung blocked it with his hand effortlessly, or so he thought. The force behind Mu's punch sent Hyung sliding backward, surprising him completely. His hand throbbed in pain from underestimating his opponent's strength. He couldn't believe how much power this seemingly weak and scrawny guy had. Meanwhile, Mu looked even more thrilled. His face lit up with excitement as he realized his attack had worked perfectly, just by copying what Hung had done earlier. There was one thing Mu had to take into account. His current body wasn't something he could rely on just. Yet when he tensed his muscles as hard as he could at the moment of impact, the strain left his arm muscles screaming in pain like they wanted to quit and take a break. Of course, Mu didn't care about the state of his muscles or how much they were suffering. In fact, the more pain he endured, the more he enjoyed the fight for him. It only made the battle even more satisfying. The thrill of this fight couldn't even compare to the feeling of battling creatures in his godly form. It was raw and exhilarating in a completely different way. Suddenly, to Hyung's surprise, Mu pulled off his belt and wrapped it around his fist. The fact that his current fragile body could cause trouble for him, especially since recovery and healing would take significantly longer, pushed him to come up with this idea. The beaten guy still watching from the sidelines thought, using a belt made the fight unfair, but neither Mu nor Hyung cared about his opinion. Hyung rushed forward again, this time fully aware that he couldn't afford to underestimate Mu. He started throwing punches left, right, one after another, trying to overwhelm him with speed and power. Mu managed to block most of the incoming strikes, but even so, he found himself in a pretty rough situation. His movements were limited by the pain in his body, and Hyung's attacks were relentless. In the middle of defending himself, Mu started analyzing his opponent's movements, only to realize they were fast and precise, but way too predictable. Just by observing Hyung's fighting style, Mu quickly began to anticipate his every move. At first, it was hard to figure out, but less than a minute into the fight, Mu was already dodging Hung's attacks with ease. And if that wasn't enough, when Hung tried to catch him off guard with a different move, Mu not only blocked the attack, but also turned the tables by punching his arm mid-swing. It only took seconds for Hung to process what had just happened and how his arm ended up broken. He began screaming as the shock wore off and the pain set in. Mu watched him silently, almost amused by the way Hong reacted. The screaming made Mu wonder if Hyung and that guy from Lee's class were really cousins, or something, as they seemed to share the same overly dramatic tendencies. Muo didn't waste much time, though. He sealed his victory with another sudden punch to the distracted Hung, knocking him out cold. For a little while, the sight left his friend, or cousin, or whoever he was, completely stunned. Things went from bad to worse for him as Mu's face shifted into a scary, excited expression, practically radiating his eagerness to fight. He declared it was time to pay for all the trouble caused, especially since this wasn't the first time they'd messed with him, the once bully, the guy who had been. So AR earlier knew in that moment that with Hyung out of the picture, there was no one left to save him. He had no doubt that a painful fate awaited him now, and there was no escaping it. Mu slowly walked toward Lee's classmate to settle things for the day. As he got closer to the beaten-up guy, Mu noticed that the guy had no intention or will to fight back, and so there was no joy or honor in beating up someone acting. So scared, the beaten-up guy for a moment noticed Mu's hesitation and thought that if he kept acting this way and just admitted he didn't want to fight anymore, everything might end peacefully. But it was too late to play the victim now. Before he even had the chance to say anything, Mu punched him in the face in one quick move. After all, this was the same guy who had started today's fight by throwing that small stone and bringing a boxer to take Mu down. He couldn't back out now. And even if he wanted to, Mu already had more than enough reason to beat him again as expected. Mu didn't show a shred of mercy and kept hitting the guy however he wanted, testing out his new copied fighting techniques on his opponent's body one after another. Even as the guy's face and body were covered in bruises and blood, Mu wasn't satisfied. He finished it off with one final brutal knee strike straight to the guy's already battered face. After putting all his strength into making this an unforgettable day for that guy, Mu finally felt satisfied. He wondered with a mocking tone in his mind why the guy wouldn't just admit defeat But deep down, Mu knew he hadn't given the poor guy even the slightest chance to do. So, after finishing with both of them, Mu walked away knowing he had other things to take care of, not to mention like all his previous opponents. He left his mark on that boxer and added him to his growing list of playthings. The beaten-up bully, on the other hand, after learning his painful lesson, was muttering Lee's name under his breath, calling him a crazy bastard. It wasn't long before Mu returned to Lee's house sitting on his bed. He felt great knowing everything was going exactly as he wanted, and he could enjoy fighting almost every day, however. Just like before, his weak muscles and fragile bones that often gave him trouble. Even breaking easily while defending him himself were annoying, and a bit concerning still in order to hold on to this feeling. A mix of fighting opponents stronger than him and experiencing the pain and recovery throughout his body. Mu decided he would do whatever it took. He decided to return to the God Realm first to see what was going on there, and to get what he had asked the Dragonling to prepare for him. Like always, he focused, and while sitting tried to leave Lee's body and return to his original form, but this time unlike before when his soul would transfer instantly. Several seconds passed, and nothing happened. Mu slowly opened his eyes and squinted, glancing around only to realize he was still in Lee's house. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't return to his body in the God Realm. The reason for this incident went back to a few days ago in Lucifer's domain. That was when Ao had forcefully thrown Lee onto Elmer's planet without Lucifer's permission. As we already know, in that day, Mu had completely ignored Lucifer, and without caring about his opinion came and went as he pleased, unaware that his actions were pushing Lucifer to his limits on his way back to his domain. That day, the Dragonling had asked Mu about his journey to Earth. Mu explained how much he enjoyed it, but also mentioned the weakness of his new body. During that conversation, Mu had ordered his assistant to find a recovery magic orb for him while he was gone, hoping it would help his weak body on Earth recover faster. There was just one small problem. Magical items were common on Elmer and a few other planets under Lucifer's control. They were abundant in those worlds because of the plentiful mana there, unlike Earth, where magical items and objects can only be obtained through divine blessings or whims. They are incredibly rare because of that. Only a handful of people throughout human history have been able to use them naturally. Those who could were often regarded as godlike beings by humans. Not long after Mu arrived at his domain, where the Dragonling had promised to find a recovery magic orb for him, the next time he returned to the God Realm. When Mu got off the dragon, his assistant reminded him once again about the upcoming gods meeting. That's when Mu casually searched in his pants, saying he had prepared something for him because of all the complaining. To the assistant disbelief, it wasn't anything grand, just a small letter. And of course, we already know what's written inside it. After delivering his message and doing what he considered his responsibility, Mu approached the miniature Earth model and placed his hand on its surface again to return to Lee's body. The Dragonling, clearly annoyed, angrily tried to convince him to at least wait and attend the meeting before leaving. But all the complaints fell on deaf ears as Mu completely ignored him just like before and transferred his soul back to Earth unbeknownst to both of them. A small demon hovered in the sky, silently observing and reporting every move to Mu's greatest enemy. The scene shifted back to the present, where Lucifer was analyzing the situation. He had no idea what Mu was up to, but he was certain his body was now empty of a soul. The fact that Mu hadn't shown up for the meeting made Lucifer realize he wouldn't be in the God's realm for a while. That's when it hit Lucifer, realizing the time has come to act. This was his chance, a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity to finally get his revenge. There was no way he was going to miss it without any warning, and determined to get rid of the one obstacle standing between him and Mu, Lucifer suddenly used his life taxidermy spell. As the spell activated, sharp purple lightning bolts, shaped like spears, appeared above the Dragonling, but the Dragonling's sharp senses didn't fail him, not one to be caught off guard. He leaped back just in time, dodging every single spear-like attack in less than the blink of an eye. His previously awkward and ashamed expression quickly shifted to one of seriousness and readiness for battle. With a firm voice, he demanded an explanation. "What's the meaning of this?" he asked sharply. His eyes glowed with intensity as he pressed further, seeking confirmation. "Lucifer, are you seriously declaring war against Mu, the god of Earth? Are you serious?" Lucifer, now filled with confidence, knowing Mu wasn't around to interfere, floated slowly in midair. Then, with a booming voice, he declared that he would personally expel Mu from the seat of divinity. He knew exactly what those words meant, and he didn't hesitate to confirm it. It was an official declaration of war. The Dragonling didn't waste any time. Without hesitation, he compressed his fiery breath and unleashed a deadly blast of flames that looked more like a laser shooting straight toward Lucifer. At first, it seemed like Lucifer was caught off guard by the sudden attack, But even without expecting it, he effortlessly dodged it with ease. Strangely, instead of dissipating, the dragon's attack spun around the god's planet-like realm and exploded violently on the far side of it. The explosion was massive, so intense that the archer god had to quickly conjure a magical shield. First, he used it to protect himself, then extended it to shield the other gods attending the meeting. Unlike the others, Lucifer didn't flinch. He didn't move a muscle, not to run, not to shield himself, nothing. The waves and flames from the explosion, like the aftermath of a nuclear blast, soon reached the meeting, roaring toward them with unstable force. As expected from the gods, neither Lucifer or the dragonling nor anyone else took any damage, realizing his first deadly attack had been completely useless against Lucifer. The dragonling decided to use his ultimate move. Polymorph released the moment he activated it. His entire body began to transform, not just his arms and legs, but every part of him started expanding. Wild red lightning crackled around him, and a fierce aura surrounded the dragon, making it clear just how serious he was about protecting his master. But even after such a legendary transformation, Lucifer wasn't the least bit impressed. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The demon god smirked and announced confidently, "I'll deal with you as Moo's little girl easily. Then it'll be Moo's turn to pay for what he did to me." The dragon, however, had no intention of letting that happen. He was fully committed to defending his master no matter what it cost him. But things didn't go as the dragon had planned. Moo's royal assistant was easily defeated by Lucifer, unable to even leave a scratch on him. His entire body was trapped in Lucifer's life taxidermy spell, leaving him immobile and badly injured. The archer god let out a sigh and decided to leave casually, stating that the atmosphere here wasn't suitable anymore for a proper godly meeting. Everyone else, however, was left frozen in shock, stunned by the aftermath of the battle between Lucifer and the dragonling. They were too scared to make a move, let alone help either side. The archer god's departure didn't escape Lucifer's notice. Suddenly, Lucifer called out to him, and with a piercing side glance demanded to know whose side he was on, whether he supported the expulsion or opposed it. The archer god, however, just kept floating away, casually responding that he was neutral. Neither supporting nor opposing. Lucifer didn't like the answer, but he made it clear he was fine with it as long as the archer god didn't interfere. Then, turning to the rest of the gods, Lucifer coldly asked if anyone objected to Moo's expulsion. But after witnessing the dragonling's state, someone as powerful as a god utterly defeated, none of them dared to speak up. Meanwhile, the dragon was still alive and tried to warn Lucifer, reminding him that he was no match for God Moo, but Lucifer just smirked and responded with a chilling revelation. He knew that Moo wasn't here and was instead living in a weak, pathetic human body on Earth. The dragonling was stunned. He hadn't expected Lucifer to know this secret, especially since he thought he was the only one aware of it. And in that moment, everything started to click. It all made sense now why Lucifer had suddenly decided to rebel against Moo. Lucifer, however, didn't admit that he'd learned the secret by spying on God Moo. Instead, he shifted the blame onto the dragon, claiming that his overconfidence in his strength and lack of vigilance had given Lucifer the opportunity to figure it out. The dragonling couldn't stand to hear such disrespectful words. With no other options left, he decided to make one last desperate attempt to stop Lucifer using his massive tail. He launched a surprise attack, hoping to catch Lucifer off guard, but once again things didn't go as he planned. Lucifer remained perfectly still, pretending not to notice until the very last second. Then, with precision and ease, he dodged the attack and slashed through the dragon's tail with a magical weapon, whether it was a spear or a sword. It didn't even matter. Lucifer's power was undeniable. The poor dragon's tail was cut into several pieces, and there was a reason Lucifer didn't just finish him off. He knew that as long as Moo's assistant was alive, he could use him to find Moo on Earth. The thought of confronting him in that weak human body and making him suffer after all the humiliations Lucifer had endured filled him with satisfaction. His devilish laughter echoed in the air while the dragonling coughed up blood repeatedly, his body trembling and powerless to do anything to stop Lucifer. Later that day on Earth, things weren't looking much better for Hyong, covered in wounds. He was getting harshly scolded by his coach for getting into a street fight to make things worse. He was being forced to take a long recovery break right before his important matches. After the lecture, his coach finally dismissed him, and as Hung made his way out of the gym, he couldn't help but mentally blame Lee for the mess he was in. Just as he reached the exit door, Kang walked into the gym, leaving the two of them awkwardly face to face. Kang immediately noticed Hung's beaten-up appearance and sour mood. Without hesitation, he asked what had happened to him. In his hand, Hung, feeling embarrassed, couldn't bring himself to admit that he'd been beaten by some random weak-looking guy, knowing that Kang was one of the best boxers in the country. A sneaky idea popped into Hai Young's head. He lowered his bruised face, putting on a shameful and sad expression, and started lying about what had happened to make it more convincing. He even forced himself to cry, letting tears fall onto the floor as he explained how he had stepped in to help his brother who was being bullied, only to have the bullies gang up on him and beat him mercilessly. He really went all out, crying like a little kid and covering his face, trying to look like an innocent victim who was just trying to do the right thing. To Hyung's surprise, Kang didn't seem moved at all. He simply ignored the tears and walked past him, casually reminding Hung that he had no one to blame. But himself, Kang told him he needed to be more careful, especially before his competitions, and walked away without another word, seeing his plan fail. And with Kang now out of sight, Hung immediately stopped crying, his face shifting to one of disappointment. But just as he turned to leave, he froze when Kang suddenly called out, "By the way." For a moment, Hung panicked, thinking Kang had seen right through him, and realized the whole thing was a fake act. But to his surprise, it was the complete opposite. Kang actually believed him, and was now asking for the name of the person who had done this to him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Mu was still sitting on Lee's dirty bed. He couldn't stop thinking about why he couldn't return to his original body, his frustration and confusion growing by the second based on his divine knowledge. And of course, his experience there could only be one reason why he wasn't able to return. It had to be that his body was seriously damaged. Even this reason didn't sit right with Mu. He was convinced that not only was a dragonling someone as strong as a god protecting him, but his godly body wasn't something that could be easily harmed. His eyes widened in shock as the realization hit him. He pieced the whole incident together and thought, what if all the gods joined forces to attack me? That seemed to make the most sense. He suddenly jumped out of the bed, panicked. If his theory was right, he didn't have time to waste. He needed to act fast, but try as he might, he couldn't think of anything to do, and that only made him angrier. Frustrated, he punched Lee's pillow to release his anger. The thought that things could spiral out of control if he didn't return to his body made him feel even worse. The idea that those gods who wouldn't dare face him one-on-one were now cowardly taking advantage of his situation was unbearable. Unable to hold back his fury, Mu started punching the bed and the pillow repeatedly. In his mind, he wished for just one chance to turn the tables and teach all those cowardly gods a lesson. If he got that chance, he vowed to make stew out of the lot of them. Finally, after a few minutes of messing around, he got tired and stopped punching. He realized it was better to calm down and think things through. He reminded himself that the Dragon Ling, his protector, wasn't someone who'd go down easily, even if all the gods teamed up against him. That thought helped him calm down a little. He started to think, if I can't do anything about my original body right now, I might as well focus on this one. At least, it'll give me a better chance of staying alive. With that in mind, he headed back to the training area. This time, he was putting his full effort into strengthening the rest of his body, ignoring his arm muscles for the moment. Training his abdominal muscles for the first time made Mu feel like they were screaming in pain. But oddly enough, that pain made the training more enjoyable for him while he was hanging and pulling himself up. The more pain he felt, the louder he laughed. He laughed so hard it echoed around the place. Of course, his obnoxious laughter made everyone around him think he was some crazy, creepy kid. Just hearing and seeing him annoyed them to no end. In the middle of his intense training, someone suddenly called his name. The unexpected voice startled Muyu, causing him to lose focus and fall straight to the ground with a loud thud. The person who called him was none other than the girl from before, Lee's class president. She was clearly annoyed, but not because of Mu's loud noises, no. She was upset because Lee hadn't shown up to school for several days to avoid making a scene. They decided to have their conversation somewhere calmer. They found a bench in a quiet corner and sat down. Mu started the conversation casually, saying, "Why would I need to go to school? It's not exactly a place where I can train my body." Hearing this, the girl frowned and asked, "Why does he want to train all the time anyway?" Mu shrugged and replied simply, "I train to get stronger, that's it." The class president tilted her head and asked, "And why do you want to get stronger?" Mu grinned and said, "To fight better and take on bigger opponents. Of course, my body's too weak right now, and that makes everything harder." From there, Mu launched into an excited rant, rambling on about his reasons for fighting and training. He talked for hours, barely stopping to breathe. The girl had no choice but to sit there and listen to his endless nonsense. By the time the sun was starting to set, she still hadn't managed to convince Mu to come back to school. She was running out of ideas, but then suddenly an idea clicked in her mind casually, as if it were no big deal. She said, "What's the point of training so hard if there's no one to fight you?" Her words hung in the air, catching Mu completely off guard. To make his point clear, he asked Lee to take a look around, pointing out that there's no one here who could challenge him, no matter how strong he gets. The girl stood up, and as she started to leave, said, "All you have to do is come to school, meet some people, and start some conflict. Then you'll have plenty of people to fight with. That she walked off, leaving the boy to think it over as she left. Mu couldn't help but feel a little impressed by her reasoning. She had a point after what he did to those poor bullies. They wouldn't dare come near him again. And without them, he needed to find someone stronger to fight if he wanted to improve and make this body stronger. For the first time, he actually considered going to school just as he was mulling it over. A shadowy figure appeared behind him and called out asking if he was Leo. The figure was wearing a mask to hide his identity and carrying a weapon. Mu, on the other hand, didn't bother answering the question. He already knew what this was about. His shocked expression shifted into one of relief. Things were going much easier than he had expected. Now he didn't even need to search for his next opponent, as his opponent had come straight to him with a small smirk. Mu simply turned his head calmly, preparing himself for the inevitable first strike and the confirmation of battle.